Rowan of Rin, The Journey by Emily Rodder. Chapter 3. The Heroes. After inspecting the cut on her son's forehead, however, Gilla simply smiled and shrugged. It was nothing serious, she said, and could be attended to at home later. All children had to put up with such things at one time or another. Rowan knew that her words were for him as much as for Strong John and Marley. She was reminding him to be brave, as befitting a child of Rin, and not to fuss. Rowan knew that Gilla worried about his nervousness and frailty. He had overheard her telling Strong John so outside their house only a month or two ago. She tried to be patient, Gilla had said, but Rowan was so different from herself and from his father, and even from sturdy little Anad, that it was sometimes very hard. She did not understand him. She wished his father was alive. Rowan had crept away and scuttled upstairs to the room he now shared with Anad. He had laid on his bed for quite a time, not really thinking about anything, aware only of a dull ache in his chest. So now he stood beside his mother with swimming head and burning eyes that said nothing. He longed to throw himself into her arms and cry for comfort, but there would be no comfort there, only shame. "I told you Sheba was a waste of time," Brondon was saying, half in triumph and half in exasperation. "Now she has 2 of our best cheeses in her grubby paws, and we are none the wiser." "Never mind," Alan had shrugged. "We decided to try her, and try we did. Now a new decision must be taken, for we cannot all climb the mountain. Who is to go?" "I will go," shouted Brondon. She glared at them all as though daring someone to oppose her. "Why not?" Strong John said. "No one doubts your willingness, your courage, or your right, Brondon. As I presume no one doubts mine, I too will go." Rowan's heart felt as though it was being gripped by an icy hand. He remembered Sheba's word. "The mountain will not test your strength, John. It will destroy it." "No," he grasped his mother's hand tightly on his arm. "And I," said Marley firmly, her eyes on Brondon. Val and Ellis had been talking quietly together. Now Val raised her gruff voice. "Until the mill wheel turns again, we have no work to do," she said, "so we will join you on the mountain. Better that than sit idle waiting." "You could do a bit of house cleaning for a change," Alan teased. Val stared at him coolly, while some of the other villagers exchanged amusing glances. Everyone knew that Val and Ellis did not like anyone to make fun of their fussy housekeeping. "This is madness," cried Neil the potter, unable to keep silent any longer. "This is no laughing matter. Brondon, John, Marley, Val, Ellis, the strongest of us all, going into the unknown." He appealed to the ground. "If they do not come back, these hotheads, how are we to survive? What will happen if the Zebak invade once more, or if some other dreadful danger threatens?" "Another dreadful danger does threaten, Neil," Old Land said. "Right now as we stand here. Perhaps the most dreadful we have ever faced, and to save the village from it, some of us must journey into the unknown. That is exactly why the strongest must be the ones to go." She turned to John. "Still, I think the party is too small as yet. We need one more." Alan stepped forward. "I agree. I will join the company to make the numbers even." He saw Brondon open her mouth to object, and went on quickly. "Ah, Brondon, I know. I am only half-bred of Rin, and my strength may not match yours. But I am not quite a weakling. I have mastered, I think, all the skills the journey will require, and I have other gifts to offer, thanks to my father's blood. A cool head for one, a good way with a campfire for another, and a stock of songs and jokes that will not go astray. Besides, with the millers absent and no flour to be had, how else will a poor bake occupy these next few days?" You could come and dig my garden, Alan, piped up Sarah, his mother. There was a shout of laughter from the people around. The old woman smiled. Only Rowan and Alan saw that her hands were gripping her apron, twisting the white cloth, and that her eyes were twinkling, not with laughter, but with unshed tears. She had lived long enough to have heard the old stories of the mountain and to fear its power, and Alan was her only child. But like a true daughter of Rin, Sarah knew how to hide her feelings. Only once, many years ago, had she let down her guard, and that was when she fell in love with the man who would become Alan's father, a laughing, brown-eyed singer who came to the village one autumn with a troop of travellers. Rowan had heard this story many times, though the thing had happened many years before he was born, when his mother and father were children themselves. It was part of the village history, and was repeated every time a tribe of travellers came to camp nearby. Rowan could imagine the shock it must have caused when it became known that Sarah, the sensible village teacher, would leave Rin to marry the footloose traveller. Most people were horrified and tried hard to make her change her mind, but she would not be persuaded, and when the travellers moved on she went too, leaving the peace and security of her old home to wander with the man she loved and his tribe. The people of Rin saw Sarah a few years after that, when the travellers chanced to come their way again. A small cheeky-faced Alan was toddling after her by then, and her happiness was in her face for all to see. Some shook their heads and said her smiles would not last, and they were right, though not for the reasons they thought. For then came the 5-year War of the Plains, when again the people of Rin, the Murris folk and the travellers themselves were forced to join in battle against invaders from across the sea. The ancient enemy, the Zebak, as their ancestors had done before them, they at last drove the Zebak from their lands. But the battle was long and cost many brave lives, and one of these was Sarah's husband. Sarah brought her young son back to the village after that. Without her man, the travelling life had no sweetness for her, and she wanted to settle down with her own people in her old home. But home for Alan was the coloured tents of the travellers, the smell of campfires burning in the night, open plains, forests, and winding roads that seemed to have no ending. Slender, dark-eyed and curly-haired, Alan was the image of his father, and very different from the tall, strong children of Rin. Under the teaching tree with Brondon, Gilla, Val, Ellis, and the others of like age in those days, he held up his head and smiled at their glances, nudges and whispers. Outside school, though, he worked hard to seem as like them as possible. He soon learned that his strength was no match for theirs, and that his wits were his best weapon. Rowan had often felt that Alan might be the one person in the village who understood how he felt, as he too was weaker and different from the others. Not that Alan had ever said so, but when he visited the house with Marley and Strong John, he had often joked with Rowan and took an interest in what he was doing, and made excuses for his mistakes. And now Alan too was to climb the mountain, trying yet again to prove himself a worthy citizen of Rin. John and Marley were looking pleased, and Brondon was rolling her eyes at Val and Ellis, clearly not liking the 6th member of the party, but unable to think of a good reason to deny him. Funny, easy-going Alan the baker was going to vanish with the others like the secret maze of the cliffs and forests that rose above them. Once more Rowan remembered Sheba's mocking face. "Ah, well, if you must go, you must. My weeds will have to thrive for another few days," old Sarah was calling, smiling and flapping her hands in mock despair, while her eyes still shone with tears. "Bless you, mother," said Alan. His tone was light, but the love and admiration in the words were clear for all to hear. "Now," said John hastily, for he was a man embarrassed by strong feelings openly expressed, "I suggest we go home and make our preparations for the journey." then a good night's sleep should be had by all before dawn is upon us. Agreed? The others nodded. The villagers called out their good nights and began slowly to move homewards. Some felt comforted because something was being done to solve the problem that had come upon them so unexpectedly, to spoil the calm progression of their days. Some felt excited, even envious at the thought of the great adventure awaiting the chosen ones. But many, like Neil, went to their beds that night with heavy hearts, because the leaders and heroes of the village was going on a dangerous quest for their sakes, and might never return. When Anad had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by the excitement, Rowan lay awake in his bed, looking out of the window at the huge bulk of the mountain. The moonlight was very bright, but the mountain loomed black against the sky, secret and full of mystery. Gila had cleaned the cut on his forehead, but his head still ached, and Sheba's jeering words of warning tormented him. He tried every way he could to turn his thoughts to pleasant things, to Star, to the new calf soon to be born in the herd, to the taste of cool blue juice from the hoopberry press, and to memories of the mother of his boyhood, a gentler, happier Gila, singing to him. But always, just as he was about to fall asleep, the other, darker thoughts came creeping back and made him afraid to close his eyes. Finally he did sleep, a shallow doze filled with nightmares. He was back in Sheba's hut, but now its four walls were made of rock, dripping with water and slime, and Sheba was huge, her nose long and pointed, her hair greasy grey tail swinging like thick ropes around her grinning face, her eyes red and piercing. Strong John and his mother stood there with him, but they made no move to help as the witch bent towards him, closer and closer, till her face was all he could see, and her breath scalded his cheeks. "If you are the only one afraid, Skinny Rabbit, you are the only one with sense," she croaked. And she opened her mouth to scream with laughter, but she had no tongue, and the inside of her mouth was a yellow and smooth as cheese. Chapter 4. Seeing is Believing. Rowan woke and lay panting and shuddering, soaked in sweat. He had no idea what time it was. The dream had seemed to take hours, but it might only have been seconds. Aned slept peacefully on, her mouth slightly open, one hand curled around her soft bucksha toy. She at least was having no bad dreams, but the thought of going back to sleep was terrifying to Rowan. He threw back the covers and leapt out of bed. It was very cold. The cool night air was blowing in the window, and his sleeping shirt was wet through. He peeled it off and quickly began pulling on the day clothes he had left in a pile on the floor when he changed for bed. Underneath the clothes was the stick Sheba had hurled at him. He had carried it home, unthinking, and brought it to his room. He picked it up and slid his finger up and down its length. It was a good stick, straight and thick, and so smooth it might have been polished, except for one little pointed bump in the middle. That was possibly what had cut his forehead, Rowan decided, pushing the soft pad of his thumb against the bump. It was hard and sharp enough. Then the bump moved. It slid forward under his thumb, and the stick began to peel. Rowan gasped as the smooth surface beneath his fingers came away in a fine single sheet. He pulled at the sheet, fascinated, as more and more of it unrolled. Then he realized that the stick was not a stick at all. It was a tightly rolled piece of parchment. The little bump at the centre had been the catch that had held it closed. With a glance at the sleeping Anad, he hurried to light the lamp. She would not wake, and he had to look more closely at this strange thing he held in his hand. For even in the dimness he could see that the parchment was not blank. There were pictures on it, and lines and words. He had to see what they were. He spread the parchment out on the wooden floor and weighed it on all four corners with his shoes and anids to stop it curling up again. Then he carefully put the lamp beside it and looked. It was a map of the mountain, with a pathway marked in red. Rowan clapped his hand over his mouth to stop himself calling out. Sheba had played a trick on them. She had pretended to let them down, knowing all the time that Rowan was carrying away just what they needed, knowing that they might never discover what she had given them. How she must have laughed to herself at Strong John's disgust and Marley's disappointment. Rowan rolled up the map tightly again and fastened the clasp. He pulled on his shoes. Then he stood in the middle of the bedroom, his thoughts whirling. "Rowan, what are you doing?" He spun around to meet his mother's startled eyes. She gaped at him from the doorway. He blinked at her. Like him, Gilla was fully dressed, as if ready to go out. Tongue-tied, he held out the rolled-up map. "I had a dream and—" "Oh, Rowan," Gilla sighed in exasperation. "These nightmares! What am I to do with you, my son?" For a moment Rowan thought he saw her lips tremble, and now this morning. She broke off and put her hands to her face. Then she lowered them. She was calm again. "If we wish to bid the mountain party farewell with the rest of the village, we must go soon," she said. "They leave at dawn. Put down that stick and gather Enid's clothes. I must wake her." She moved towards the little girl's bed. "Mama." In his confusion, Rowan used the babyish word without thinking. He saw her brow crease and heard her quick in-drawn breath of irritation. "Mother," he went on quickly, and so loudly that Enid stirred and began waking of her own accord. "Mother, I have the map of the mountain." "He has the map of the mountain," Gilla said again to Strong John, ignoring the exclamations of the crowd. Her cheeks were pink with excitement, and her hood flung back over her shoulders. She looked to Rowan very beautiful, and perhaps she did to Strong John too, for he was looking at her admiringly. "Then quickly let us see," demanded Brondon, stamping her tough boots in the cold. "But I cannot believe this. Why would the old woman try such a trick? Are you sure the boy is not playing the fool?" "Of course not," snapped Gilla, taking the map from Rowan and passing it to her. "See for yourself." Brondon unrolled the parchment and stared at it for a moment, her breath making little puffs of mist in the cold morning air. Then her mouth turned down at the corners and passed the parchment to John and Marley. "Well?" Alan, standing beside Rowan and Gilla was feverish with curiosity. "What is it? What has the boy found?" Strong John turned the parchment around to face them. It was completely blank. "But," Rowan burst out, "it was there! A drawing of the mountain, the words, the arrows, and a tract marked in red, leading to the cloud, and above it. It was." Brondon sniffed and jerked her head towards the empty sheet still dangling from John's hand. "Seeing is believing," she said, turning away. "Small boys should learn that it is a big mistake to try playing tricks on their betters to gain attention." "Maybe you were dreaming, Rowan," said Alan, patting him on the shoulder. "Too much cheese at dinner, huh? This happens to me sometimes. Things seem to be real." "This was real," Gilla broke in. She frowned, staring at the parchment, as if even now she could not believe her eyes. "Rowan held it up to me. I saw it myself. Am I too playing a trick on my betters, Brondon?" There was an embarrassed pause. Strong John bit his thumb thoughtfully. Then he passed the parchment back to Rowan. "If Gillan And Gilla and Rowan say the map was there. I believe them, he said. But the fact remains that now it is not. Perhaps Sheba wished to build our hopes, then send them crashing down. Gilla smiled at him gratefully. That would be very like her, agreed Marley. Her jaws dropped, and she pointed at Rowan. Look, look, she grasped. Rowan, red-faced and startled, found the eyes of the village upon him. People were exclaiming and staring. What was happening? What he had done now? It took him a moment to realize that they were not looking at him. They were looking at the parchment in his hand. He glanced down at him, and the stab of shock he received was immediately followed by a rush of relief and joy, for the map was slowly reappearing. Shapes, words, and finally the red dotted path winding upwards. Strong John held out his hand. Rowan, give it to me, he commanded. Eagerly Rowan surrendered the parchment. John took it and held it up. There was a buzz of excitement and then a groan of dismay from the villagers, for as they watched, the lines and arrows were fading. In moments the parchment was blank and clean again. John passed it around. The people stared at it as it went from hand to hand, unchanging. It is witchcraft, exploded Neil, thrusting it back to Strong John as if it was poisonous. Sheba is toying with us. I fear she is, said John slowly, and it is a dangerous game she plays. He looked at Marley. I am very much afraid that Sheba's idea is to make me eat my words, he said to her. He put the parchment back into Rowan's hand and watched gravely as once again marks, shapes, and lines appeared on its surface, faint at first, but growing clearer by the second. What does this mean? Cried Gilla, clutching her son's shoulder. Strong John hesitated. Last night, angered by something I told her, Sheba said of Rowan, it would do you no harm to be guided by him. I believe that out of spite she has bewitched the map so that it only reveals its secret in Rowan's hands. You are right, Marlowe was thinking aloud. She threw it at him last night. She intended him to discover it. She intended that this scene, which we have just witnessed, should be played out. She paused. Sheba wants the boy to join us on the mountain. No! The word burst from Gilla before she could stop it. She bit her lip and composed herself. I mean, she went on carefully, Rowan is young, too young to be of use to you, and he has the Bolshar to see to. He cannot go. Of course he cannot, agreed the teacher, Timon. He pushed his way to the front of the crowd, and I have the solution to this little dilemma. Rowan can hold the map while I copy it with my own ink on my own paper. He spread out his hand. It may take an hour, and Rowan's arms may tire, but it will be worth it to him, for Rowan can then go home to bed, fortunate boy, while you poor fools go off for your little stroll. Yes, Marley exclaimed. We will beat Sheba at her own game. She forgets we are not Bucksha to be led about so easily. But Sheba had forgotten nothing, for no matter what Timon did, he could not copy the map. Whenever he tried, the pens he used and discarded one after the other scattered across the copying page as if it were greased with butter, though they worked perfectly if he tried to draw anything else. After half an hour he had not succeeded in producing one useful line. Finally he threw away his last pen with a grunt of disgust and sat back on his heels in a mound of screwed-up paper. Enough, said John. We were going without the map before. Nothing has changed. We go without the map now. He nodded to Rowan, carefully avoiding Gilla's eyes. We thank you, he said, for at least we have seen glimpses of the way. We will remember much of it, and this will help us. Go home now with your mother. But this is senseless, snapped Brondon. The map will ensure our success and safety. We must take it with us, and if the map and the boy are joined by whatever trick, we must take the boy with us too. Anyone can take his place with the Bucksha. His attachment to them is foolishness in any case. We agree with Brondon, said Val. Her brother beside her nodded. "The village depends on this. There is no room for faint-heartedness here." "The boy cannot come," insisted Strong John. "The danger is too great. He is too young." "Or is it that his mother is too beautiful?" remarked Brandon pointedly, "and your heart is ruling your head, John of the Orchard." John's face flushed scarlet. Rowan felt Gilla's arm stiffen and saw her lift her chin, while 2 spots of bright colour began to burn in her cheeks. "Mama, what's the matter with John?" whispered Anad, pulling at her mother's skirt. "Why is he all red?" Gilla did not reply. Rowan looked from one face to another in the crowd, and slowly, with a sinking feeling, the truth came to him. There were other children here of his age. If this had happened to any one of them, there would be no argument. It would be taken for granted by John and Timon, by their parents, by everyone else, that they would go. And they would want to go. It would be the greatest adventure of their lives, their chance to prove themselves heroes. It was because he was, like he was, that Strong John was taking the stand, because he saw it now. Strong John loved his mother and was trying to save her from shame and pain. Rowan began to quiver. Shiva's words rang in his ears. "The mountain will not test your courage, it will destroy it." Why had she done this to him? If the mountain could destroy the courage of one such as Strong John, who feared nothing, what could it do to Rowan of the Buckshire, who feared everything? He was filled with dread, loneliness and shame in equal parts. He could not bear it. He could not bear the rueful eyes of the villagers upon him. They too must be thinking, why him, the most disappointing child in the whole of Rin? But what unlucky chance was he, their chosen saviour, when all he could do was to let them down? He turned towards his mother, ready to hide his face in her skirt, and just at that moment a picture flashed into his mind. He saw himself standing in the Buckshire fields, with Storm's warm muzzle bent to his hand, and the other beasts grazing around him, huge, calm, and trusting. He had never disappointed the Buckshire. He had never let them down. In the frosty early mornings, or in the heat of the sun, when they were injured or giving birth to their calves, or when they needed comfort as the dragon roared, he had been there. Now they needed water, and they would not expect him to fail them. To them he was not an undersized, scared weakling. To them he was leader, guide, and friend. They trusted him absolutely. The thought flowed through him like warm, rich milk. He raised his head and looked straight at Strong John. "I will go," he said. The map he held fluttered in the little breeze that always came from before the dawn. "I will go with you to the mountain."